Hello, everyone. Let's go ahead and move forward with the last session. I get the honor of introducing Peter Smith, who is a great thinker. And as a great thinker, yeah, you have a lot to live up to as a great thinker now. He helped to found the Community College of Vermont, California State University, Monterey Bay. He was the founding president of both those places. He also was a state senator and lieutenant governor in Vermont, and also was a congressman in Vermont back when they used to have great thinkers in Congress. Oh, wait, sorry. Did I say that out loud? He's with me. Let's see. He also, they pulled him over to a small gig in Paris to work with UNESCO as their assistant director for general for education while he's over there. And now he's working with the Kaplan Higher Education Group, where he's paid to be, what else, but a great thinker. And we like such a great thinker that we pulled him onto our executive council. So we're very pleased to have us to think great thoughts here at the end and help to get great thoughts from you. I'll turn it over to Peter Smith. Thank you.
Wow. First of all, I understand I stand between you and getting out of here. So we're gonna try to make this lively, and but join me in thanking Molly and Russ and the whole staff for putting together what has just been a phenomenal meeting. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to back up a little bit. What I want to do, my major takeaway from the last 2 days is that it is premature to try to say there's 1 or 5 or 10 modalities. I happen to think we'll come down to that for either assessment or the delivery of instruction or learning support or whatever. What I said when I was at Monterey, Cal State Monterey, for the first 10 years, 11 years of its existence, when I was with the second president who got to deal with all the real problems, was I got to make snow, now you got to make a snowman. And turn it over the process, or if you will, of 3 presidencies, it becomes an institution as opposed to somebody's project. And so I believe we are, when it comes to competency-based education, or online education, or all the different kinds of support and direct and indirect assessment and all the things we're talking about, we're still making snow, and we should be comfortable with that. So what I'm going to try to do is play back a few of the characteristics. So rather than saying there is an answer, there are, I think, and it's been surfacing throughout this meeting, there are going to be questions that as you get into this or pursue these lines, there are questions you have to ask and you have to answer whatever the answer is. And the answer has to fit your situation, because I think that's the situation the development of knowledge is in around these things. And so what I'm going to start the list, and then I'm going to throw it open, and my capable supervising associate is going to be writing everything down. But I think it would be just dandy if, along with all the other richness that's come out of this, we could end up with 5 or 8 or 10 or 12 questions that we would say anybody getting into any of this business has to satisfy themselves that they've asked and answered these questions. So that's what I'm going to do. Now let me back up a little bit and tell you, so you know where I'm coming from, although I've been told over the years it's not hard to figure out after a while. I'm in love with learning, and I didn't know it until I was about 45, and I won't tell you how long ago that was, but it's longer than I would like. And I got my start having something that I thought was a phenomenon explained in a more organized research way by a Canadian researcher named Alan Tuff. Alan Tuff just died, and it's a sadness for anybody who cares about learning projects. But he defined something called the Adult Learning Project. And we know, thanks to him and all the follow-on research, we know that the average adult spends more than 700 hours a year learning something purposeful. It's usually 8 to 10 projects. Some do 25, some do 3. But the average is 10 to 12 projects and 700 to 800 hours. Well, that may not all be post-secondary, but there's got to be something going on in there. And so since I started the Community College of Vermont, this all happened around the same time in the early 70s, I have been on a search for how to make sense out of the learning patterns that adults have, and if we can harness the natural energy of that learning pattern, and we can then figure out how to harvest the value that comes from that learning, and then we can wrap all our fancy programs around that. But then you start with the learner, and you start with the learning, and you try to figure it out. So you can see how that fits with the whole notion of how we recognize learning. To have a nice introduction, to tell you one political story, when I was leaving the Congress, which is what you say when you lose. And it's a little bit like attending your own wake, because you still got a couple of months until the new guy or gal is sworn in. And so you're going around doing your thing. And I'm at a Rotary Club, I think it was, maybe it was Kiwanis, in Middlebury, Vermont. And the guy was introducing me. Now, coming from higher education, you can understand, I think, how it is possible, like in a small town in Vermont, for you to know somebody for a long time and really not like them. And they really don't like you because they lost a parking battle or an office battle or a faculty senate vote back in '93. Well, the guy who's introducing me is that person in my life from elementary school. He had worked for every opponent I ever had. It was absolutely fine. I mean, it was just the way it was. So he's introducing me, and luckily I sent my short resume, being as I was in a taper of my own. And he stood up and he read it word for word. And then he folded it in half, creased it, and said, "It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Congressman Peter Smith, a man with a great future behind him." So I'll thank you, Russ. I'll take it all day long. Now, to go to the heart of assessment, there are two things that I believe about the larger world of assessment, and then I'll get to my points. Assessment, competency-based, whatever. I believe that great assessment has to include, however you do it, reflection. And I believe that reflection-based assessment can, in fact, be a pedagogy. When people talk about what happens to experiential learning, people who are assessing their experiential learning, and we heard a lot of those stories, what's happening is that people are beginning to understand and reflect on things they've done that they've forgotten, that they never knew had value. They're beginning to associate the value of what they've done in their lives with the purpose for which they have come back to learn more. And I think reflection is the way that you extract meaning from experience. I don't care really whether it's a 300-student lecture hall or an internship or a trip to France. You don't get credit, as we all know, for going to France. But you do get credit for things you can document that you learned. And that leads to the second piece, which is that it seems to me whatever language we use, we're talking about evidence. And that's a straight lift from Peter Ewell. So, you could take me on almost anything else I say, but he's my God when it comes to outcomes-based education. And so and evidence is the way that you convert the value of your learning into a career value or an academic value. And it's the way you convert it. So reflection, evidence, and value. Those, wherever you learned it, however you learned it, including today in a classroom, those are the kinds of things that drive me. Now, and if you're so fascinated you want to know more, I have a blog called Rethinking Higher Ed, and it's great right before you go to sleep. Here are the characteristics that I've come up with, and I want you to be thinking about this because this thing is really going to roll up like a window shade here pretty quickly. I'm not going to give you a long speech on these characteristics. And they aren't in any order, but the questions that I think you have to adapt to your own situation and answer to your own satisfaction. Because a number of us were saying yesterday, what kills you when you get into the kind of game that we're all in one way or the other is hesitation, is ambiguity, is not being quite sure why you're doing what you're doing and what it means to do it well. So, number one, start with outcomes. How do you feel about evidence? How are you going to collect the evidence? But beneath that, how will you know it's working? How will you know it's working? A year later, somebody says, hey, what's happening under the hood? You can't say, beats me. You've got to know beforehand what it is. You can modify and change. And then how do you do it? In other words, it's one thing to design it. It's another thing to talk about it, which is what I do mostly, thank God, these days. But doing it, outlining the process and making sure that you've got all the steps, doing it it's critically important that you answer that question. These are so obvious. Maybe the only, if there's anything helpful about this, is that it pulls them out. How are you treating instruction, faculty, and subject matter experts? No one answer to that one, for sure. We've heard full-time faculty touted as a virtue. We've heard part-time faculty touted as a virtue. And we've heard self-paced learning touted as a virtue. And we've heard subject matter experts looking at portfolio. I mean, it's not that it doesn't matter. The question is, what works for you, and how are you going to, when somebody says, well, how do we know that you've got a qualitative product in terms of content assessment, et cetera, you've got to have an answer. And in it, you have to deal one way or the other with subject matter experts, faculty, instruction, and then the kinds of things that really surprised me, because I hadn't thought about them, were learning services, call it whatever you want, mentoring, advising, 24/7 help, I'm caught, I don't know what to do, and learner support. And I think Greg, who I think has by now finally gotten a plane and gotten out of here, but he said it, the best we're ever going to be is number 3. And it's just, I've never thought of it that way. But how do you say and then, in fact, be there? And you have to be there to the extent you say you will be there to support people when life happens to them. Then there is purpose. Maybe that should come first. Purpose, mission. Why are you doing it to begin with? Population. Who are you trying to serve? Partners. Institutional and non-institutional. I would tell you, if people think they can do everything, that's a long walk off a short pier. We are living in an age of specialization where you will get not only better branding and stability. I think of partnerships as like, if you're starting something new, it's like a very tippy canoe. And I'm not making a pun on whoever had Tippecanoe and Tyler too. So partnerships are like outriggers on the canoe. They help you know. Now you can learn enough to divest yourself or not, but again, what is it you're going to do yourself? What is it you're going to ask others to do, etc., both developmentally and afterwards. And finally, data. What kind of data is going to be important to you for your business plan, important to you for the quality of learning that is going on, and important to you in sort of understanding faculty progress or success, however you've characterized that, and learner success. So that you hear, it may be demoralizing, it's since I'm not much of a data guy, it just blows me away to hear some of the things that you've heard as well about complex data analytics. But I can tell you I work with a bunch of people that do it, and we can tell after 2 weeks with about a 90%, which isn't good enough, accuracy, who's going to be around at the end of the second term and who isn't. Based on if we have an anomaly in a class, we can understand quite quickly among the cohort of classes whether it's a curricular problem, a group teacher problem or it's an individual student problem, based on what the patterns are. Are we great at it? No, not yet. Do we want to be? Yes. But when you start, ask the question, what is it that's most important for us to know in each of our major streams of activity at the end of the first year, and get those things. And it won't be as good as you'd like it, but it'll be a start. So that's the best I can do. Do we all have to do it? No. I'll close with another little tale. If you're a recovering politician, you got stories, right? This is obviously true. They're all true. Actually, the first one was true. There's two old guys in Vermont. You see, they're over in Thetford. They're on the Connecticut River, and they're sitting around doing what old guys do. I don't know about older women, but which is drinking coffee and trading tall tales and telling lies. And in comes a third guy, their friend Earl. And Earl has a huge basket filled with fish of all kinds. And he gives the fish to the restaurant owner. Says, "Here's your fish." And one of them says, "Why, Earl? Where'd you get those fish?" And he says, "I fished them." "Oh, Earl, you can't fish. You never could fish. You stole them." He says, "You want to see?" This has to do, by the way, with whether we have a choice. He says, "Will you come down to the river tomorrow? Get my boat and we'll go out in the Connecticut River and we'll do some fishing." So the guy came down, 7 o'clock the next morning, got in a boat, he went out in the middle of the river. He's got a net and a creel, opens the creel, pulls out a stick of dynamite, lights it, throws it over, dead fish everywhere, nets them, fills up the basket, half full. The other guy says, "Earl, you can't do that. It's against the law in Vermont, it's against the law in New Hampshire, and it's just not sporting." Earl says, "Oh." Pulls out a stick of dynamite, lights it, hands it to his friend and says, "Now, you going to talk or are you going to fish?" That is my general view. Whether we like the way it's happening, that's basically the situation we're in. We're going to fish. And I say with that, I'm in awe of the quality of fishermen and women that we have in this room. So help me with my list, and let's have a conversation about current or additional things that you need on that list.
They're very shy, Peter.
Oh, yeah. And, oh, there's somebody.
I'll just throw out one word and let everybody else add to it. Leadership.
Thank you.
Well, mine's, I think it's related to the purpose and mission, but I would ask, is it an improvement, and for whom? Right? So is it improving over what we've already gotten, for whom?
Did everybody hear that? That's great.
While I think this is a great opportunity for every school to really put their imprint on something special, I think we also need a degree of sort of interoperability so that when students do leave, and then one or two will leave these fabulous programs, and go somewhere else. I'm a registrar, the much maligned and totally underrepresented person here. I'd like to be able to make sense of that as students. I'm going to use the word credit, and I know that term is getting passé already, but I think we need enough portability, no matter how we choose to structure these.
Great. So while somebody else is coming up with another idea, this could be an agenda. Each of these could, if you think about it, they've been all through our agenda for the last 2 days, and I was thinking some form of this might be a handy way to organize information so that people can at least make their own sense out of what they need to do, rather than trying to read all the literature, that there might be a way to use this going forward for writing and research and collection. Yes, Dan?
I would add value, and that means determining who your stakeholders are and what their values are, because they're going to be different, and they may be conflicting.
Great. Yes, Russ?
Well, I'll add one for somebody I think who's left. I was going to pick on them, but they were asking for details in working with the financial aid. I know there's a lot of discussion about that, about the federal financial aid, and also with accreditors, just making sure that we're working with both regional and also the professional accreditors, so to make sure that whatever happens with this fits in with those people.
Great. Thank you.
I just got this email 2 minutes ago. A new policy statement was recently posted by SACS, our accrediting agency, excuse me, that affects our toe into a competency program. What should we do? So I'm just pointing. My point is, yes, accrediting agencies is a big issue. I would add one big thing up there. Just about every big program that has spoken this week has mentioned the significant capital outlay to get started. So budgeting considerations, is the money there? Where is it going to come from? All that has to be obviously a part of your thinking early on.
Great. Thank you.
I think I heard in some of my groups, too, of what institutions that aren't ready to just like throw everything away that you're currently doing, but really kind of stepping back and assessing kind of what you can do more focus in terms of the outcomes within the infrastructure and the programs that you already have. And so looking at the resources, but again, all of that still takes a leadership component to kind of allow that change to happen, because change is scary, everybody.
Yes, sir.
I just did a back-of-the-envelope calculation on some of your initial comments, and I've determined that you're about 85 years old, so I want to say you're very well preserved. But that's not my comment.
God love you.
Pardon my math. So I talk to faculty a lot about moving towards some form of a mastery model, and I'm trying to figure out right now if there's where the alignment and maybe where the potential conflicts between prior learning assessment or whatever we want to call it and a true mastery model of assessment, where they're, again, it's just an interesting problem to me where they're aligned and where they may not be aligned.
I think, and when I talk about making snow versus making snowmen, I think my gut feeling is we will end up with 4 or 5 dominant modalities for offering learning and 4 or 5 dominant ways of actually making sense out of it, which will go to your concern about portability. And in the meantime, we have to be aware of the problems and do the best we can. The thing that I'm struggling to understand at this point, except I can't remember anything because I'm so old. No, the thing I'm struggling to understand is, what is the value of tacit learning? What is the value of learning that I have done and forgotten about? And how do we make it thoroughly legitimate, not just for learners to understand that it's in there affecting them and it's important to get it out? And it's the way you connect, I call it the me in here with the it out there, which is the curriculum or the goal of my learning. And when that personal connection is made, people are going to stick around, or tend to. When it isn't made and it's being done to them, especially if they're first generation or otherwise marginalized people, it becomes a lot harder, I think, to hold on to them. So to me, the way we move towards, I don't think we'll ever have one way, and I'm making a joke, sort of. I think it's un-American, our higher education system. And if we had any doubts about whether it needs help, if you haven't seen the Gallup Purdue poll from earlier this week, released Tuesday, look it up, because it says, is there a need for us to make some changes? You betcha. There really are. There is. But I think having several ways that have been learned, we have learned our way towards collectively as a community, would for me be an acceptable goal. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
I
ma'am.
have sort of a different question. Being familiar with the Lumina work on outcomes and the AAC&U, and then this morning so fascinated by the Global Learning Qualifications Framework, I'm wondering if we're moving towards a Common Core standard for higher education. Seriously? I mean, it's beginning to look like that's what we're talking about. And if so, what are the politics around that, and how do we need to think about handling or not getting into negative politics that would be, I know it's a question that's kind of in the future, but it seems to me to be implicit in a lot of what we've talked about.
I think it's reasonable. That's a great question, first of all. I'm also a former school board chairman of a small town in Vermont, so I haven't been as far north as you, but I hung around in the woods. And I think the fundamental difference, and I'm going to quote somebody not by name, the fundamental difference between K-12 reform and post-secondary reform is that K-12 is structured historically and legally to be a local and a state entity, and there are how many? 25,000 school boards in America. There are 300 districts in Vermont. When I left, they're all the way down to 180 now. This, for 700,000 people. I'm a little off on that, but there's just no way, and the politics are intensely local. Now, there was a guy at the National Superintendents Association 2 years ago. I was working on the SARA stuff with CSG and WCET and others, and we were having a meeting at the Council on State Governments, and he said, I'll tell you why this is going to fail. We were having a side conversation about the Common Core. But you can see where it came from, the same reason it appeared to you. How do we do all these cats and dogs in a consistent way across 50 states? He said the reason it isn't going to work is because middle-class parents don't want to see their kids come home with B's. And I thought, oh my God, it's a pogo deal. You meet the enemy and it's you. Now that may not be us, but I'd be willing to bet that our kids come home with A's anyway, most of the time. But so you take the politics of the local districts, and then parents concerned that their children look like they're doing well, plus this, I'll leave it blank, notion that somehow it's a federal takeover of education, and it's just a perfect storm for K-12. If the department, and you may correctly think that our sector is in the soup right now, but a political maxim I learned from another person is, if there's a lion in your front yard, escaped from the zoo, ate your dog, ate your cat, ripped up your garden, and he's looking around for more, you got a choice. You can lock your door, turn out the lights, and hide under the couch, and at some point the lion's going to come and get you and eat you too. Or you can figure out, I won't use the more brutal solution, figure out a way, trap the lion and take it back to the zoo, get rid of it. I actually think the rebellion, and forget about me, NICU, community colleges, the minute, and it's already starting with the community colleges, the minute that we do not have a Ministry of Education in this country, we have a Department of Education, and the minute they start to say, beyond some minimal amount, I think that you have to do things this way that does not include apples to apples on the demographics of your student and what you're trying to do, so you actually get consistent results about good practice, average practice, and bad practice within cohorts that make sense. And I happen to think that isn't private nonprofit, public nonprofit, and private for-profit, proprietary. I think it cuts a very different way. But if that happens, I think you will see an uproar and beginning to see it amongst community colleges, because this new gainful employment thing is going to take some of their programs out. And it doesn't have much to do, in most cases, with whether or not I mean, we really don't want to educate child care aides. We really don't want to educate nurse aides. We really don't want to educate, I mean, if you get into this stuff, if that kind of dictation comes along, I think there's going to be a big spat. And I don't think it'll be from the right for one reason, but it'll also be from the educational community, because at the end of the day, it is as American as apple pie to figure out for yourself how you want to learn and how you want to offer learning. I mean, that is, now, should we have our arms around that? You bet. But should we cut it up like brownies in a pan? No. I think that would be a disaster. So that's what's so cool about what Jamie and the Lumina folks did, and Carol Gary Schneider and the folks at AACU did, is they said, we're not going to tell you how to address these. We're going to just say, we think this is a good starting point. And that's what the good accrediting is doing now. And they're being very clear about what they want you to answer, but they're not telling you how. To me, that's the policy and the political balance we need to remind ourselves of. Uh-oh.
Was a quick one I was going to add to your list. Formative faculty engagement. Formative faculty engagement for long-term sustainability, even though I realize there's no guarantee. And that's why I use the word ongoing. Because there's nothing worse than setting up people's aspirations and then pulling the rug out from under them by canceling this, withdrawing that program, and that sort of thing. So if we care about long-term success and achievement, we have to have sustainability, and I still think that faculty are critical to that because they've spent many years preparing for this role, and it's not something that can be easily replaced, but so that's my point.
It's critical if you have faculty, but there are a lot of places that don't. What's occurring to me, Karen, is that there may be here 8 or 9 big buckets into which we can put. If you miss that point and you're in a situation where it matters, you're in the soup. I agree with you. Yes.
Peter, I wanted to go back to what you were saying just a moment ago, and I absolutely agree with you with regard to the degree profile. I can never get the letters right. And the things that are now emerging at AACNU. But to your notion of what will be required, requested, insisted, I don't think it's going to be federal. It's going to come through the states. Mm-hmm. And I believe that Iris Palmer left. Yeah, she caught the plane that she was trying to, yeah. Anyway, and Iris is very involved with giving the states and the staffs of the governors tools to be able to ask the right kinds of questions about what's really going on with higher education investments. And while that's particularly pertinent to public institutions, it's going to play out for privates as well, regardless of their tax status.
Of course.
So I think your scenario of an uprising is unlikely because, again, it's going to be state by state by state by state.
I only hope you're right. That would be much more appropriate even if I didn't agree with the policies that a state legislature passed and a governor signed. I just hope you're right. I want to shamelessly flack a book that some of you may have seen. Callie Morrison and Russ have contributed to a chapter in this book, Assuring Quality in Online Education. It's edited by Kay Shattuck, and it's done by a press I've never heard of, frankly, Stylus Publishing. But why am I saying this is talking about quality assurance academically, in terms of student support, in terms of finances, and as I have read it and then listened for the last 2 days, these are the background questions. You can read. You can pick the section you want to read. You can pull this book into 4 parts and give it to 4 different parts of your program and have them read the part that had to do with them. But I think it's a splendid collection and organizational format for the questions that we do not ask often enough or at the right time. So that's, just wanted to get, I'm not in it, by the way, so no. Anything else? Go in peace. Thanks.